Oh my God, I am so sorry.
Do not apologize. I should be thanking fate.
Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The elevator doors slid open with a mechanical whisper, revealing the sterile white corridors of Grace General Hospital's executive floor. Ethan Carter stepped out, his Italian leather shoes silent against the polished linoleum as he made his way toward Dr. Thompson's office. At 32, he carried himself with the confident stride of a man who had built a tech empire from nothing. But today, something felt different, heavier. 9 months. It had been exactly 9 months since he'd last walked these halls, and the antiseptic smell triggered memories he'd buried under 18-hour workdays and enough charitable donations to fund a small country. His annual executive physical was a routine he'd maintained religiously since his company went public, partly for insurance purposes, mostly because his board insisted their CEO stay healthy enough to make them richer. Mr. Carter, Doctor. Thompson's nurse smiled as he approached the reception desk. Right on time. The doctor will see you shortly. Ethan nodded, settling into one of the plush leather chairs in the waiting area. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline stretched endlessly, raindrops racing down the glass like tears he refused to shed. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails about quarterly projections and merger negotiations, anything to keep his mind from wandering to thoughts of dark skin, gentle hands, and the way someone used to laugh at his terrible jokes. Mr. Carter. Doctor. Thompson appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Let's get started. The physical proceeded with mechanical efficiency, blood pressure slightly elevated, heart rate normal. Though the doctor noted, Ethan looked tired. Weight lost. 15 pounds, not intentionally. Ethan answered the routine questions about sleep patterns, stress levels, and alcohol consumption with practiced deflection. He'd become an expert at avoiding conversations about anything that mattered. Everything looks good, Doctor, Thompson concluded. As Ethan buttoned his shirt, though I'd recommend you consider talking to someone about stress management. Your cortisol levels are concerning for someone your age. Ethan was sliding his arms into his suit jacket when the hospital's intercom crackled to life with urgent static. Code Blue, maternity ward. We have an emergency need for B-negative blood. Any available B-negative donors, please report to the maternity ward immediately. Repeat, urgent need for B-negative blood in maternity. Doctor. Thompson glanced at Ethan's chart. You're B-negative, aren't you? Been donating since college, if I remember correctly. Ethan froze, one arm halfway through his jacket sleeve. B-negative, the rarest blood type, shared by less than 2% of the population. He'd been donating since his freshman year at Stanford, partly from a genuine desire to help, partly because it was one of the few ways his rare blood could be useful to someone. Mr. Carter? Yes, Ethan said slowly, pulling his jacket on completely. I'm B-negative. They really need you down there. Maternity emergencies. Doctor. Thompson shook his head. Time is everything. Without another word, Ethan was moving. He didn't think about why his feet carried him so quickly toward the elevator, didn't question the sudden urgency that made his chest tight. Someone needed help, someone with his blood type. It was simple math, simple human decency. The elevator ride to the maternity ward felt endless. Ethan watched the floor numbers climb. 12, 13, 14, 15. His reflection stared back at him from the polished steel doors. Dark hair slightly mussed from the examination, gray eyes that people often called calculating, but which his mother had once described as sad, a face that had graced the cover of Forbes twice, but never looked quite right to him in photographs. The maternity ward was chaos wrapped in controlled medical precision. Nurses moved with practiced urgency, their scrubs a rainbow of colors against the pale walls. Ethan approached the nurse's station, his presence immediately commanding attention in the way money and authority always did. I'm here about the B-negative donation, he said to the first nurse who noticed him. Thank God, she breathed, relief washing over her features. Room 302. They're prepping for an emergency C-section. Mother and babies are in distress. Babies, plural. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. Coincidences happened. B-negative blood was rare. He was simply being useful. He followed the nurse down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and hope, past rooms where new families were beginning their stories and others where difficult endings were being written. Room 302 was at the end of the hall, its door partially open, revealing a controlled storm of medical activity. "Right through here," the nurse instructed, leading him toward what he assumed was a prep room for donation. "The patient is in active labor, but there are complications. We need to be ready for anything." Ethan nodded, rolling up his sleeve as they walked. He'd done this dozens of times before. Simple procedure: needle in, blood out, save a life, go home. Except they weren't heading to a donation room. They were heading directly into the delivery room. "I think there's been a mistake," Ethan started to say, but the nurse was already pushing through the door, and he found himself following her into the controlled chaos of an emergency delivery. The room was a symphony of medical equipment and urgent voices. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking vital signs that Ethan couldn't interpret. A team of doctors and nurses moved with practiced precision around the delivery bed, their focus laser-sharp on bringing new life safely into the world. And then Ethan saw her. Olivia Bennett lay in the center of it all, her dark skin glistening with perspiration, her hair pulled back in a surgical cap, her face contorted with pain and effort. Even in the midst of labor, even with her features twisted in agony, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. She was also supposed to be a memory, a chapter closed, a mistake he'd walked away from 9 months ago. 9 months. The math hit him like a physical blow. 9 months since that night, 9 months since he destroyed the best thing in his life because he was too much of a coward to admit he was terrified of being happy. 9 months since he told the woman he loved that she was getting too attached and that he'd never intended for their relationship to be serious. 9 months since she'd sat in his apartment, hand pressed to her stomach in a gesture he'd been too panicked to understand, trying to tell him something important while he was busy building walls and burning bridges. "Push, Olivia," the doctor was saying. "We're almost there. One more big push." Olivia's face was a mask of concentration and pain, her entire being focused on bringing her children, their children, into the world. She hadn't seen him yet, standing frozen in the doorway like a man watching his entire world shift on its axis. "Mr. Carter," the nurse whispered urgently beside him. "We need to get you prepped for donation. The babies might need transfusions." Olivia's head turned at the sound of his name. Her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had once looked at him with love and trust and infinite possibility, met his across the room. For a moment, time stopped. The medical equipment fell silent. The urgent voices faded to whispers. In that suspended moment, Ethan saw everything: shock, recognition, and then pure, undiluted rage flooding across Olivia's features. Her body went rigid on the delivery table, her breathing becoming sharp and shallow in a way that had nothing to do with labor. "No," she gasped, her voice cutting through the medical chatter like a blade. No. "Olivia, you need to focus," the doctor said firmly. "The baby is crowning. We need you to get him out." Olivia's voice rose to a desperate shout, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Get him out now." The delivery room erupted into confused voices. Nurses looked between Olivia and Ethan, trying to understand the sudden crisis that had nothing to do with the medical emergency they were managing. Dr. Sofia Rivera, the attending physician, looked up from her position at the foot of the bed, her face a mask of professional concern. "Olivia, who is this man?" "Dr. Rivera asked sharply. "Security, please. Escort, I'm the father," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The words felt foreign in his mouth, weighted with a reality he'd spent 9 months refusing to acknowledge. Olivia let out a sound that was part laugh, part sob, entirely broken. "Father." She looked at him with eyes that held enough pain to drown a man. "You're not their father. You're just the coward who ran away." Security had arrived, 2 large men in uniform, looking uncertain about how to handle a situation involving a laboring woman and what was clearly a very wealthy man. Ethan raised his hand slowly, his gray eyes never leaving Olivia's face. "I'll go," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Olivia." But as he turned to leave, Olivia's body was racked with another contraction, and despite everything, her anger, her pain, his presence that was clearly causing her distress, her medical training kicked in. She grabbed the nearest nurse's hand and pushed with everything she had. The first baby entered the world with a healthy cry that filled the room with joy and chaos. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, torn between Olivia's clear desire for him to leave and the impossible pull of hearing his child's first breath. "It's a boy, Doctor," Rivera announced, lifting the tiny, perfect infant. "He's beautiful, Olivia." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, but when her eyes found Ethan again, they held nothing but cold fury. "Get him out!" she screamed again, her voice raw from effort. "I don't want him here. I don't want him to see them." Another contraction. "Doctor," Rivera warned. "Olivia, the second baby is coming. I need you to focus." Security moved toward Ethan, but he was already backing toward the door, his heart breaking with every step. The last thing he saw before they escorted him from the room was Olivia's face, beautiful and fierce and absolutely devastating in her rejection of his presence at the most important moment of their children's lives. In the hallway, Ethan slumped against the wall, his legs unsteady. Through the partially open door, he could hear the medical team working. Olivia's efforts. And then, the moment their second child entered the world with cries as strong as her brother saw a daughter. He had a son and a daughter who would grow up knowing their father as the man who'd abandoned their mother. Ethan Carter had built an empire worth billions, had never failed at anything he'd set his mind to. But unlike his business ventures, this failure might never be fixable. Chapter 2. Unspoken Truths. 9 months earlier, the charity gala at Grace General Hospital was exactly the kind of event Ethan Carter usually endured rather than enjoyed. Champagne flutes clinked against forced conversation, wealthy donors competed to see who could write the largest check, and everyone pretended their philanthropy wasn't primarily motivated by tax breaks and photo opportunities. Ethan stood near the silent auction table, studying a vacation package to Tuscany. He had no intention of bidding on when the accident happened. A server carrying a tray of champagne collided with a woman in navy scrubs who was clearly trying to slip through the crowd unnoticed. Glass shattered against the marble floor, and Ethan watched as bubbling champagne soaked the front of the nurse's uniform. She stood frozen in mortification, surrounded by the wreckage of crystal and judgment from Seattle's social elite. Without thinking, Ethan stepped forward. "My fault entirely," he announced loudly enough for nearby donors to hear. "I wasn't watching where I was going." The nurse looked up at him with dark brown eyes that held surprise and gratitude in equal measure. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight natural, unguarded. With skin the color of warm honey and hair pulled back in a practical bun that somehow made her cheekbones look sculpted. When she smiled, something shifted inside him that he'd never experienced at any of these vapid social functions. "You don't have to do that," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I was the one not paying attention." "Olivia Bennett," she introduced herself, extending a hand that was steady despite the champagne dripping from her scrubs. "Pediatric nurse, 3rd floor." "Ethan Carter," he replied, taking her hand and feeling an electric shock of connection that had nothing to do with static electricity. "Professional party crasher." Apparently. Her laugh was genuine, musical, and completely at odds with the pretentious atmosphere surrounding them. "Are you really going to take the blame for my clumsiness?" "Absolutely. I have an image to maintain as Seattle's most philanthropically clumsy millionaire." The words came out easier than they ever had at these events, natural and unguarded in a way that surprised him. Olivia studied his face as if she could see straight through the facade he'd perfected over years of networking and deal-making. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. In fact, I insist on replacing your uniform and probably buying you dinner as an apology for my egregious sidewalk navigation skills." That was how it started, not with grand gestures or calculated charm, but with champagne-soaked scrubs and a woman who saw right through him. Their first date ended up at a 24-hour diner, sharing pie while Olivia told him stories about her young patients. 8-year-old Liam, who wore his superhero cape during chemo. 5-year-old Chloe, who drew pictures of her favorite nurses. "You love them," Ethan observed, watching Olivia's face light up. "They're everything," Olivia replied. "Pure resilience, pure hope. They face things that would destroy most adults, and they still find ways to believe in tomorrow." Ethan had never met anyone who spoke with such passion about healing children. His own career was built on strategic acquisitions, profitable but hardly inspiring. "What drives you?" Olivia asked. "When you're not taking blame for champagne catastrophes." Looking at Olivia across their table, he found himself wanting to be driven by something meaningful. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted, more honesty than he'd given anyone in years. Their relationship developed with frightening intensity. Ethan began spending evenings at the hospital, not for publicity, but because Olivia's shift ended at 7, and he couldn't bear going to sleep without seeing her face. Olivia's tiny apartment felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. They made love like people who'd been starving. Olivia generous and uninhibited, tracing the scars on his chest with gentle fingers and not asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. "I love you," Olivia whispered one night as they lay tangled in sheets. "I know it's too soon, but I love you, Ethan Carter." The words terrified him. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant eventual abandonment. "I love you too," he whispered back, meaning it more than anything in his life. That was his first mistake. As their relationship deepened, Olivia began talking about their future with casual confidence. Meeting his friend, she realized he had none. Meeting her family at Christmas, he panicked and changed the subject. Moving in togatheric conversation felt like a trap closing around him. Olivia spoke about when we and our plans with the assumption that someday actually existed. Ethan began having nightmares about waking up to find her gone, leaving nothing but a note explaining she'd realized she could do better. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. Olivia had made dinner, real dinner, with candles and wine. Ethan arrived late from a business meeting, irritated from dealing with investors. "How was your day?" Olivia asked warmly. "Fine," Ethan replied. The same non-answer he'd been giving for weeks. Olivia set down her fork. "You're pulling away from me." Ethan felt his chest tighten with familiar panic. "I'm not pulling away. I'm here. Physically, yes. Emotionally." Olivia shook her head. "It's like you're preparing for this to end." She was right. He'd been preparing since the moment it began, because everything good eventually ended. "Maybe we're moving too fast," Ethan said carefully. Olivia's face went still. "What does that mean?" "Maybe we should slow down. Think about what we really want." "I know what I want," Olivia said quietly. "I want you. I want us. I want to build something real." Her certainty terrified him more than any business negotiation ever had. "Olivia," he started, but she held up her hand. "Never mind. I have something to tell you, and maybe it will help clarify things." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. We're going to have a baby." The words hit him like a physical blow. Pregnant. Baby. The ultimate trap, the final chain that would bind him to someone he was destined to hurt. He stared at her across the table, watching hope and fear war across her beautiful features, and felt something inside him snap completely. "You're what?" His voice came out cold, controlled. Nothing like the warmth she deserved. "Pregnant," Olivia repeated, her confidence cracking at his tone. "I know we haven't discussed children, but I hoped you'd be happy." Happy? She expected joy about being permanently bound to someone who would eventually realize he wasn't worth loving. "This is exactly what I mean," Ethan said, standing abruptly. "You're getting too attached, Olivia, making assumptions about us." Olivia's face went pale. "What? This is Ethan? I love you. You said you love me, too." "I never said this was permanent." He lied, hating himself with every word. "I never promised you forever." "You didn't have to promise it," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. "I could feel it. Every time you touched me, every time you looked at me like I was the only woman in the world." "You read too much into things," Ethan cut her off, his voice deliberately cruel. "I enjoy spending time with you, but that doesn't mean I want to play house and start a family. We're from different worlds, Olivia. This was never going to be permanent." Olivia stood slowly, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "Different worlds," she repeated, as if testing the words for truth. "You mean I'm not good enough for you?" "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I'm good enough to sleep with, good enough to spend time with when you're bored, but not good enough to build a life with." "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Ethan said, the phrase feeling like acid on his tongue. We both knew this wasn't serious. Olivia stared at him for a long moment, and he watched as hurt transformed into something harder, more protective. Get out, Olivia. Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. And don't you dare come back here pretending you care when you've made it clear that you don't. Ethan left that night and never came back. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner. Olivia would realize she was better off without him, would find someone worthy of her love, and build the family she deserved with a man who wouldn't destroy everything he touched. What he didn't know was that Olivia had spent the next 3 months calling his office, leaving messages that were never returned. She tried to tell him about doctor's appointments and ultrasounds and the day they'd learned they were having twins. His assistant, following his explicit instructions to handle all personal matters, had informed Olivia that Mr. Carter was unavailable and would not be accepting any further contact. Present day. She tried to reach you, Rachel Bennett said, her voice sharp with accusation as she stood in the hospital waiting room. Olivia's older sister had arrived within an hour of the twins' birth, and she clearly held Ethan personally responsible for every minute of pain her sister had endured. I didn't know, Ethan said quietly, slumped in a plastic chair that had probably been designed by someone who'd never experienced real despair. You never thought she'd have something important to tell you. Like the fact that she was carrying your children. The words hit him like physical blows. She tried to tell me about the pregnancy multiple times. She called your office, sent letters to your company. Your assistant told her you weren't available for personal matters and that she should stop calling. Rachel's dark eyes, so similar to Olivia's but harder, more judgmental, bored into him. So she did. She stopped calling and decided to raise your children alone, rather than beg for attention from a man who'd made it clear she wasn't worth his time. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his own stupidity crushing down on him. I didn't. No, he repeated, but the words felt inadequate even to his own ears. You didn't want to know, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. Through the window of the family waiting area, Ethan could see nurses moving efficiently through the hallways, carrying flowers and balloons to rooms where new families were celebrating the best day of their lives. Somewhere in this building, Olivia was recovering from giving birth to his children. Children she'd carried alone for 9 months while he'd convinced himself he was protecting her by staying away. What are their names? He asked quietly. Rachel studied his face for a long moment before answering. James Ethan and Ava Rose. She gave them your name as their middle name, even after everything you put her through. James Ethan. Ava Rose. His children had names, had taken their first breaths, had entered the world while he stood frozen in a doorway like a coward. Can I see them? Ethan asked. Though he already knew the answer from the way Rachel's expression hardened, Olivia was very clear about that. You're not to come near her or the babies. If you try, she'll call security. Ethan nodded, accepting the judgment he'd earned. Will you tell her something for me? I'm not your messenger service. Please, Ethan said, the words scraping his throat raw. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I know sorry isn't enough, but I need her to know that I never stopped. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Never stopped what? Loving her, Ethan whispered. I never stopped loving her. I was just too much of a coward to stay and prove it. Rachel's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Love isn't something you feel, Mr. Carter. It's something you do. And what you did was abandon my sister when she needed you most. With that devastating truth, Rachel walked away, leaving Ethan alone in the waiting room with the weight of his failures and the echoing cries of children he might never get to hold. Chapter 3. First rejection. The hospital confrontation. 3 days. Ethan had spent 3 days pacing the halls of his penthouse, staring at his phone, drafting and deleting text messages he'd never sent. 3 days of barely eating, not sleeping, and trying to process the reality that he was a father to twins he'd never held, children who bore his name but would grow up knowing him only as the man who'd abandoned their mother. The flowers had cost more than most people's cars, not because he thought money could fix what he'd broken, but because he didn't know how else to begin. 24 white roses, Olivia's favorites, though he doubted she'd remember that he'd ever paid attention to such details. The florist had wanted to include an elaborate arrangement with exotic blooms and gold accents. But Ethan had insisted on simplicity. Olivia had always been beautiful in her naturalness. She didn't need jilting. The card had taken him 47 attempts to write, 47 crumpled pieces of expensive stationery scattered across his marble floor like white flags of surrender. In the end, he'd settled on something pathetically simple. For James and Ava, please let me try to do better. Ethan. Grace General Hospital felt different during afternoon visiting hours. The controlled chaos of emergency medicine gave way to a gentler rhythm. Families coming and going. Grandparents meeting grandbabies for the first time. New fathers walking the halls with exhausted pride written across their faces. Ethan moved through this landscape of joy, feeling like an intruder, his expensive suit and guilty conscience marking him as someone who didn't belong in this world of natural happiness. Room 318. Olivia's room number had been surprisingly easy to obtain. A generous donation to the hospital's children's wing had made the nursing staff remarkably accommodating, not bribery exactly, but close enough to make Ethan hate himself a little more. He stood outside her door for a full 5 minutes, listening to the soft sounds from within. A television playing quietly, the rustle of bedsheets, and underneath it all, the tiny noises that could only come from newborns, his children, James and Ava. 2 lives he'd helped create, but had no right to claim. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing glass, Ethan knocked gently. "Come in," Olivia's voice called. Warm and tired, and completely unprepared for what was coming. Ethan pushed open the door and stepped into a room that felt like stepping into sunlight. Olivia sat propped up in the hospital bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a soft yellow robe that made her skin glow. She was more beautiful than his memory had managed to preserve. Motherhood had added something radiant to her features, a soft contentment that made his chest ache with longing. But it was the babies that stopped his heart completely. Olivia held one against her chest, skin-to-skin contact that spoke of maternal instinct and fierce protection. The baby, he couldn't tell if it was James or Ava from the doorway, was tiny and perfect, with dark hair and skin that was a beautiful blend of both parents. The second baby lay sleeping in a bassinet beside the bed, equally perfect, equally miraculous. For a moment, the 3 of them existed in a bubble of peaceful perfection. This was what he'd thrown away, the family he'd been too terrified to claim. Then Olivia looked up and saw him. The transformation was immediate and devastating. The soft contentment vanished from her face, replaced by something hard and protective and utterly closed off. Her arms tightened around the baby she held, and her entire body went rigid with tension. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet, controlled, but Ethan could hear the edge of panic underneath. "I brought these for you," Ethan said lamely, holding up the flowers like they were a peace offering instead of a pathetic gesture. "For the babies." Olivia stared at the roses for a long moment, something like pain flickering across her features before the protective mask returned. "You remember that I like white roses." "I remember everything about you," Ethan said softly, taking a step closer. "Don't." Olivia's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't come closer, and don't stand there talking about remembering me. You remembered me enough to walk away." Ethan stopped, his hands tightening around the flower stems. "Olivia, I know I have no right to be here, but you're right. You don't have any right to be here." Olivia shifted the baby to her other arm, and Ethan caught a glimpse of a tiny face, perfect features relaxed in sleep. "You want to see your children? Fine, here they are." She gestured toward the bassinet with her free hand, then pulled back the blanket covering the baby. She held, "James and Ava Carter Bennett, take a good look, because it's the last time you'll see them without a court order." The names hit him like physical blows. Carter Bennett. She'd given them his name. Even after everything, even after he'd destroyed her trust and abandoned her when she was most vulnerable, she'd still wanted their children to carry part of him with them. "They're beautiful," Ethan whispered, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't contain. "They look like you. They look like themselves," Olivia corrected sharply, "and they're mine. I carried them for 9 months, while you decided whether or not you wanted to be a father. I went to every appointment alone, felt every kick alone, went through labor alone. These are my children." "Our children," Ethan said quietly, and immediately realized it was the wrong thing to say. Olivia's eyes flashed with fury. "Our children. You think because you contributed DNA 9 months ago, you get to claim ownership?" "You called me clingy, Ethan." You said I was getting too attached, like love was some kind of disease. Now you want to attach yourself to my children." The baby in her arms stirred at the sound of raised voices, making a small noise of distress. Olivia immediately softened her tone, cooing gently and rocking the infant back to sleep with practiced ease. The sight of her natural maternal instincts made Ethan's chest tighten with a mixture of awe and regret. "I was scared," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was terrified of being a father, of being responsible for someone else's happiness. I'd never had a family before, Olivia. I didn't know how to." "Scared." Olivia's laugh was bitter and sharp. "You think you were the only one who was scared? I was 28 years old, pregnant with twins, and the man I loved told me I was too attached to him. Do you think I wasn't terrified?" Ethan wanted to cross the room, to kneel beside her bed and beg for forgiveness, to explain about foster homes and abandonment and the bone-deep terror that came from loving someone too much. But the way Olivia held their child protective, defensive, like she was shielding the baby from his very presence, made it clear that explanations were 9 months too late. "I'm sorry," he said instead, the words feeling inadequate and hollow. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry, Olivia. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I went through pregnancy alone. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I had to choose names by myself, that I had to feel them move and grow without anyone to share it with. Sorry doesn't change the fact that when I went into labor, I was terrified I might die, and they'd never know their father because you'd made it clear you didn't want to be found." Each word was a precisely aimed blow, and Ethan took them all because he deserved everyone. He'd earned her anger, her pain, her absolute right to protect their children from the man who'd already proven himself unreliable. "What can I do?" Ethan asked desperately. "How can I make this right?" Olivia stared at him for a long moment, and for just an instant, he saw something that might have been longing flicker across her features. Then it was gone, replaced by iron resolve. "You can leave," she said quietly. "You can walk out of this room and let me raise my children in peace." "I can't do that," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "They're my children, too, Olivia. I know I don't deserve them, but I can't just walk away again." "You already walked away," Olivia reminded him, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "You looked me in the face and told me we were from different worlds, that what we had wasn't serious. You made your choice 9 months ago. I made the wrong choice." "Yes, you did. And now you have to live with the consequences." Olivia reached over and pressed the call button beside her bed. "I think you should leave before I call security." Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. This couldn't be how it ended. He couldn't lose them again before he'd even had a chance to try. "Olivia, please, just give me a chance to." "No." The word was final. Absolute. "You don't get to decide when you're ready to be a father, Ethan. You don't get to show up when it's convenient for your guilt and expect me to welcome you with open arms." The door opened, and a nurse appeared, her expression professional but concerned. "Is everything all right, Olivia?" "Mr. Carter was just leaving," Olivia said without taking her eyes off Ethan's face. "He won't be coming back." The nurse looked between them, clearly sensing the tension but uncertain how to proceed. Ethan made the decision for her, setting the roses on the bedside table and backing toward the door. "This isn't over," he said quietly, but Olivia shook her head. "Yes, it is. The same way it was over 9 months ago when you decided I wasn't worth fighting for." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, revealing the pain she was trying so hard to hide. "I won't let my children go through the same heartbreak you put me through. I won't let them wonder why they weren't enough to make their father stay." Ethan wanted to tell her that it had never been about her not being enough, that she'd been too much, too perfect, too good for someone as broken as him. But the words stuck in his throat because he knew they would sound like excuses. And Olivia deserved better than excuses. "I love you," he said instead, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I love you, and I love them. And I know I have no right to say that after what I did. But love isn't what you feel," Olivia interrupted, unconsciously echoing her sister's words from 3 days earlier. "Love is what you do, and what you did was abandon us." Security appeared in the doorway. 2 large men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else than escorting a grieving father away from his newborn children. Ethan held up his hands in surrender. "I'll go," he said quietly. "But Olivia, this isn't over. I'm going to find a way to make this right." Olivia's hands shook as she adjusted the baby in her arms, but her voice remained steady. "Don't contact me again, Ethan. If you want to see them, you can go through the courts. But I won't make it easy for you. I won't let you hurt them the way you hurt me." Ethan walked out of that hospital room, feeling like he was leaving pieces of his soul behind. In the elevator, surrounded by other visitors heading home to their own families, he finally understood the true cost of his cowardice. He'd lost more than Olivia's love. He'd lost the right to be a father to his own children. But as the elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying him away from everything that mattered, Ethan made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. Olivia was right. Love wasn't what you felt. It was what you did. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was going to fight for something that mattered more than money or success, or protecting himself from pain. He was going to fight for his family, even if it took everything he had. Chapter 4. Second Rejection. Legal Warfare. The law offices of Bradley, Klein, and Associates occupied 3 floors of downtown Seattle's most prestigious building. William Bradley handled only high-profile cases requiring discretion that could only be bought with obscene money. Ethan sat across from Bradley's mahogany desk, feeling every inch the desperate father he'd become. 2 weeks had passed since Olivia ordered him out of her hospital room. "Paternity establishment is straightforward," Bradley said. "We file the petition, request DNA testing, and within 60 days, you'll have legal recognition. From there, we pursue visitation rights, even joint custody." "Joint custody?" Ethan repeated. "Half their lives, half their bedtime stories, half their Christmas mornings. Miss Bennett will contest it," Bradley continued. "But you're financially stable, have no criminal record, and can provide advantages she simply can't match. Private schools, trust funds, opportunities she could never afford on a nurse's salary." The casual dismissal of Olivia's worth made Ethan's jaw tighten. "This isn't about money, Mr. Carter. In family court, everything is about what's best for the children. A judge will have difficulty arguing that a struggling single mother can provide better opportunities than a man of your resources. What are my chances? Excellent. As long as you can demonstrate genuine interest, which your willingness to pursue legal action shows, I'd say better than 70% odds." "Draft the papers," Ethan said, hating himself. Olivia stared at the legal documents spread across her kitchen table, the formal language seeming to leap off the pages like accusations. Petition for paternity determination and custody rights, motion for court-ordered visitation, request for genetic testing. Her one-bedroom apartment felt even smaller with her sister Rachel, pacing angrily across the worn carpet, baby Ava sleeping peacefully in her arms, while James dozed in his bouncer near the window. This was supposed to be their safe space, their sanctuary from the world and its complications. Now it felt invaded by legal terminology and the weight of Ethan's determination to insert himself into their carefully constructed life. "He's actually doing it," Rachel said, her voice tight with fury. "He's actually trying to take them away from you." "Not take them," Olivia corrected wearily, though the distinction felt academic. "The petition is for shared custody and visitation rights. He wants to be their father. 9 months too late." Olivia couldn't argue with that. 9 months of pregnancy, 2 weeks of newborn life, and countless moments when she'd wondered if their father would ever want to know them. Now, faced with legal action instead of genuine remorse, she felt something harden inside her chest that might never soften again. Susan Harper arrived 30 minutes later, her no-nonsense demeanor and budget briefcase, a stark contrast to whatever legal firepower Ethan had undoubtedly assembled. Legal aid attorneys didn't wear designer suits or charge fees that could feed a family for a year, but Susan had 20 years of experience fighting for women who couldn't afford better representation. "I've reviewed the petition," Susan said without preamble, settling into Olivia's second-hand chair with the ease of someone accustomed to making do. "Mr. Carter has strong legal counsel and significant financial resources. This isn't going to be a simple case." "What are my chances of keeping them?" Olivia asked, unconsciously echoing Ethan's question from Bradley's office. "Honestly, if this goes to trial, it's going to be difficult. Fathers' rights advocates have been very successful in recent years, and judges are increasingly reluctant to deny paternity rights without evidence of abuse or neglect. Susan's expression softened slightly. "You're a good mother, Olivia. But the court's primary concern is what's best for the children, and they'll look at things like financial stability, educational opportunities, and long-term advantages. So, money wins," Olivia said bitterly. "Money helps," Susan corrected. "But it's not everything. Mr. Carter abandoned you during your pregnancy. He made no effort to be involved until the children were already born. That pattern of behavior is something we can use." Olivia felt a spark of hope. "How?" "We challenge his commitment. If he truly wanted to be a father, why didn't he respond when you tried to contact him? Why did he wait until after the birth to assert his rights? We paint a picture of a man who wants to play father when it's convenient, but has no real understanding of the daily responsibilities involved." It felt like preparing for war, which Olivia supposed was exactly what this Wassa custody battle where her children would become pawns and their family's private pain would be dissected in a courtroom full of strangers. "There's something else," Susan added carefully. "Mr. Carter has significant resources, which means he can drag this out for months, possibly years. Legal aid can represent you, but our resources are limited if he wants to wear you down through extended litigation." The implication hung in the air like a threat. Ethan could afford to fight for as long as it took. Olivia was already struggling to balance work with caring for newborn twins. Adding months of legal battles would stretch her past her breaking point. "I won't give up my children," Olivia said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "I don't care how long it takes or how much money he has. They're mine." The King County Family Court building was a monument to bureaucratic efficiency, all concrete and fluorescent lighting designed to strip emotion from proceedings that were by their very nature deeply personal. Olivia sat at the defendant's table beside Susan, trying to project calm while her heart hammered against her ribs. Across the aisle, Ethan sat with his legal team, looking every inch the successful businessman in his perfectly tailored suit. This was the first time she'd seen him since the hospital, and the sight of him made her chest tight with memories she'd worked hard to bury. He'd lost weight, she noticed. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, shadows under his gray eyes, tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. Good, she thought viciously. Let him suffer a fraction of what she'd endured. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Lynn," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom rustled to attention. Judge Lynn was a slight woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She settled behind the bench with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to making decisions that would forever alter people's lives. "We are here for the matter of Carter versus Bennett regarding paternity determination and custody arrangements for minor children, James Ethan Carter Bennett and Ava Rose Carter Bennett." Judge Lynn's voice carried the weight of judicial authority. "Mr. Bradley, you may proceed with your opening statement." Bradley rose with theatrical precision, every movement calculated for maximum impact. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about a father's right to know and care for his children. Mr. Carter acknowledges that his initial response to Miss Bennett's pregnancy was inadequate, but he stands before this court today, ready to accept full responsibility for his children's welfare and future." Olivia felt sick listening to the sanitized version of events. Inadequate response made it sound like Ethan had simply failed to send flowers, not that he deliberately destroyed their relationship and fled from responsibility. "Mr. Carter is prepared to provide financial support, educational opportunities, and stability that will ensure these children have every advantage in life." Bradley continued. "He's not seeking to diminish Miss Bennett's role as their mother, but rather to establish his rightful place as their father." When Bradley sat down, Susan rose with quiet dignity. She lacked Bradley's theatrical flair, but her words carried the weight of truth and lived experience. "Your Honor, Mr. Carter may be ready to be a father now, but he wasn't ready when Miss Bennett needed him most. During her pregnancy, she attempted multiple times to contact him, to include him in medical appointments and preparations for their children's arrival. His office repeatedly told her he was unavailable for personal matters." Olivia watched Ethan's face as Susan spoke, saw him flinch at the accurate description of his abandonment. Part of her felt a savage satisfaction at his obvious discomfort. Another part, buried deeper and fiercely suppressed, ached at the pain written across his features. "This isn't a case about father's rights," Susan continued. This is about a man who walked away from responsibility and now wants to claim the benefits of fatherhood without acknowledging the consequences of his abandonment. Miss Bennett has been the sole provider, sole caregiver, and sole decision-maker for these children since conception. She's asking this court to protect her children from the emotional instability of a man who has already proven he will leave when circumstances become difficult. The words hit their target. Ethan's composure cracked slightly, his hands clenching on the table in front of him. Olivia felt a fierce surge of pride in Susan's unflinching defense. "I'd like to call Miss Bennett to the stand," Susan announced. Walking to the witness stand felt like a death march. Olivia kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to look at Ethan as she passed his table. The bailiff swore her in with practiced efficiency, and Olivia settled into the witness chair with as much dignity as she could muster. "Miss Bennett," Susan began gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Carter?" "We dated for 6 months," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the emotional minefield she was navigating. "I thought we were building something real together. He told me he loved me." "When did you learn you were pregnant?" "In March. I was excited to tell him. I thought he'd be happy." Olivia's voice caught slightly on the last word, remembering that night and the hope that had been so brutally crushed. "How did Mr. Carter respond when you told him about the pregnancy?" Olivia took a breath, forcing herself to remain clinical in her recounting. "He told me I was getting too attached. He said he'd never intended for our relationship to be serious, that we were from different worlds. He broke up with me that night." "Did you attempt to contact him after that?" "Yes. Multiple times. I called his office, sent letters to his company. I wanted him to know about doctor's appointments, about the ultrasounds, about the day we learned we were having twins." Olivia's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by righteous anger. "His assistant told me repeatedly that Mr. Carter was unavailable for personal matters and that I should stop calling. How did that make you feel?" Bradley rose immediately. "Objection. Your Honor, the witness's feelings are irrelevant to the legal determination of custody." Judge Lynn considered for a moment. "I'll allow it. The emotional impact of Mr. Carter's actions is relevant to assessing his fitness as a parent." Olivia looked directly at Ethan for the first time since entering the courtroom. His gray eyes were fixed on her face with an expression of such profound regret that she almost lost her composure. "It made me feel worthless," she said quietly, "like I was something to be discarded when I became inconvenient. I realized that the man I'd fallen in love with either never existed or was someone I'd never really known." Bradley's cross-examination was brutal but predictable. He painted Olivia as vindictive, as a woman keeping children from their father out of spite. He questioned her financial ability to provide for twins, suggested that her work schedule as a nurse would leave the children in daycare while Ethan could afford full-time nannies and the best private schools. Olivia answered each question with calm precision, refusing to be rattled by Bradley's obvious attempts to make her appear unstable or vindictive. But she could feel the courtroom's mood shifting, could sense that Bradley's arguments about financial advantages and opportunities were having their intended effect. When Ethan took the stand, Olivia braced herself for more sanitized explanations and carefully crafted remorse. Instead, she got something that surprised her: raw, unvarnished truth. "I was terrified," Ethan said in response to Bradley's question about his initial reaction to the pregnancy news. "I'd grown up in foster care, never had a real family. The idea of being responsible for someone else's happiness, of potentially failing children the way my own parents had failed me. I panicked. But you're ready now to accept that responsibility?" "I'm ready to try," Ethan corrected. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise that I'll never abandon them again. They deserve better than what I gave Olivia, and I want the chance to prove that I can be the father they need." Susan's cross-examination was merciless. "Mr. Carter, you say you were terrified of being a father. Were you also terrified of being a boyfriend, a partner, a husband?" "Yes. But you entered into a relationship with Miss Bennett anyway, knowing you had these issues." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I thought I could handle it." "You thought you could handle it," Susan repeated. "But when it became real, when there were actual consequences to your relationship, you ran." "Yes. And now you want this court to believe that you're ready to handle the responsibilities of fatherhood." "I've been in therapy," Ethan said quietly. I'm working on my issues. For how long? Ethan hesitated. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of therapy to address a lifetime of abandonment issues, Susan said, her voice dripping with skepticism. Mr. Carter, if you couldn't commit to a relationship with the woman you claim to love, how can you commit to children who will need you every day for the next 18 years? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Ethan looked across the courtroom at Olivia, and she saw something break in his expression. I can't make any promises about forever, he said finally. But I can promise that I want to try. These are my children, and I want the chance to know them. Even if that means disrupting the stable home Miss Bennett has created. I don't want to disrupt anything. I want to be part of it. Susan smiled coldly. Mr. Carter, you can't have it both ways. You can't abandon someone and then expect to be welcomed back into their life when it suits you. Fatherhood isn't a part-time job you take when you're ready for it. Judge Lynn called a brief recess, and Olivia followed Susan into the hallway, her hands shaking with adrenaline and suppressed emotion. How did we do? Olivia asked. Susan's expression was grim. He was more honest than I expected, which actually hurts our case. The court likes to see remorse and growth, and his financial advantages are real, Olivia. A judge looking at private schools versus public schools, trust funds versus student loans, it's going to be a factor. When court reconvened, Judge Lynn delivered her ruling with the clinical precision of someone accustomed to altering lives with a few words. This court recognizes Mr. Carter as the biological father of the minor children and grants him supervised visitation rights, beginning with 2 hours every Saturday in a neutral location. Miss Bennett will retain primary physical custody. Mr. Carter is ordered to pay child support in the amount of $3,000 per month. This arrangement will be reviewed in 6 months to assess Mr. Carter's consistency and commitment to his parental responsibilities. Olivia felt simultaneously victorious and defeated. She'd kept primary custody. But Ethan had gotten exactly what he'd asked for: legal recognition and access to their children. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Outside the courthouse, Olivia stood on the steps while Susan packed her papers. Ethan emerged alone, his legal team having vanished into black sedans. For a moment, only 3 feet of concrete and 9 months of hurt separated them. Olivia, Ethan said quietly, exhaustion weighing his voice. She faced him, surprised by her own composure. You got what you wanted. Congratulations. This isn't what I wanted, Ethan replied. I wanted you to forgive me. I wanted us to find our way back to each other. Olivia's laugh held no humor. You wanted a fight. You got one, and you lost. Don't contact me outside of court-mandated visits, Ethan. We're done. She walked away without looking back, leaving Ethan alone on the courthouse steps. But even as she climbed into Rachel's car, Olivia couldn't shake the memory of broken pain in Ethan's eyes when she delivered her final blow. Chapter 5. Third rejection, the volunteer trap. 6 months of supervised visits had established a painful rhythm. Every Saturday at 10 o'clock a.m., Ethan would spend 2 hours under Mrs. Clark's watchful eye, then leave feeling like he'd touched something precious, only to have it snatched away. James and Ava were growing with alarming speed, changing so rapidly that each week brought new milestones he was missing between their stilted encounters. The supervised visits were sterile affairs in a room that smelled like disinfectant and broken families. Mrs. Clark observed every interaction, while Ethan tried to bond with children who remained essentially strangers. They're beautiful children, Mrs. Clark noted, well-adjusted, healthy, clearly well cared for. They seem comfortable with you, Mr. Carter. Comfortable. Such a lukewarm assessment of what should have been the most important relationship of his life. The therapy sessions with Dr. Emily Foster had become the most honest conversations of Ethan's life. Twice a week, he dissected 32 years of emotional avoidance and abandonment issues. Tell me about this week's visit, Doctor, Foster said. Ava laughed, Ethan said, wonder in his voice. Really laughed. I was making faces at her, and she thought it was the funniest thing in the world. How did that make you feel? Like getting a taste of water when you're dying of thirst. What would it take to prove that you've changed? Time, Ethan said immediately. Consistency. Being there when I say I will, every time, for as long as it takes. This conversation led to his decision to volunteer at Grace General's pediatric ward. Working with children fighting for their lives put his problems in perspective. The kids didn't care about his net worth. They just wanted someone to read stories, play games, and listen to their fears. Ethan had been volunteering for 3 months when Olivia discovered his presence, 3 months of reading to 8-year-old Liam, who insisted Batman could beat cancer through sheer determination, 3 months of playing board games with Chloe, who drew pictures of her favorite nurses and demanded Ethan hang them on the playroom wall. 3 months of learning that being genuinely useful felt better than any business success. He was mid-game of Connect 4 with 10-year-old Noah when he saw Olivia walk past the playroom window. She stopped mid-stride, her face cycling through surprise, recognition, and fury. Ethan's heart rate spiked, but he forced himself to finish the game. Noah was undergoing chemotherapy for leukemia, and their weekly games had become the highlight of both their weeks. The boy deserved his full attention, regardless of the storm that was undoubtedly brewing in the hallway. "You let me win," Noah accused, but he was grinning as he said it. "I would never," Ethan replied with mock seriousness. "You're just getting too good at this game. Will you be here next week?" The question that had become ritual, because children in pediatric cancer wards learned early that adults made promises they couldn't keep. Ethan met Noah's eyes with the honesty the boy deserved. "I'll be here," he said simply, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Olivia was waiting for him in the hallway when he left the playroom, her arms crossed, her expression thunderous. She'd changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a sweater, which meant her shift was over, and she'd been waiting specifically to confront him. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Now." Ethan followed her down the corridor, past the nurse's station, where several of Olivia's colleagues watched with undisguised curiosity. He'd been careful not to mention his connection to Olivia during his volunteer work, introducing himself simply as Ethan, a businessman who wanted to give back. But hospital gossip being what it was inevitable that someone would make the connection between the man reading to children and Olivia's baby daddy who'd been causing such drama. Olivia led him to the parking garage, her heels clicking against concrete with a sharp, angry rhythm. The sound echoed off the low ceiling, creating an atmosphere that felt distinctly confrontational. When they reached her car, Olivia turned to face him with the controlled fury of someone who'd been planning this conversation for hours. "You're stalking me at my workplace now?" Her voice echoed off the concrete walls, carrying the weight of months of suppressed anger. "Using sick children to manipulate me. That's low, even for you." The accusation hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Olivia, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," she interrupted, stepping closer until he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes that had once looked at him with love. "You're volunteering with pediatric patients because you know I work here. You're trying to rehabilitate your image, playing the part of the caring father figure while you fight me for custody of our children." "That's not why I'm here," Ethan said desperately. "I volunteer because these kids need people they can count on." Olivia cut him off, her voice rising with each word. "They need adults who won't disappear when things get hard. They don't need you using them as props in your campaign to convince a judge that you're father material." Ethan felt anger flare in his chest, not at Olivia, but at the impossible situation he'd created for himself. Everything he did now was suspect, every gesture interpreted through the lens of his past failures. He couldn't volunteer at a hospital without it being manipulation. He couldn't express genuine care for sick children without it being strategic. "You're wrong," he said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "I'm here because Noah looks forward to our games, because Liam needs someone to believe in his superhero theories, because Chloe draws me pictures that I hang on my refrigerator and think about every day." "Right," Olivia said with bitter sarcasm. "The rich guy who abandoned his own children suddenly cares about other people's kids. How convenient." "I am trying to be a better person," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "I'm trying to learn how to care about someone other than myself, but apparently even that is wrong in your eyes." Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's wrong? What's wrong is that you're trying to become the man I needed you to be 9 months too late. You're reading to sick children, while your own children see you for 2 hours a week under supervision. You're learning to be caring and consistent with everyone, except the people who actually need you to be those things." The words hit their target with devastating precision. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. The careful composure he'd maintained for months, finally beginning to crumble. "I see them every week," he said weakly. "I'm trying to build a relationship with James and Ava." 2 hours on Saturday is not a relationship, Olivia shot back. "It's an appointment. Those children don't know you, Ethan. They don't trust you. They don't run to you when they're scared or look for you when they're happy, because you haven't earned those things. But somehow you think volunteering here will prove you're ready to be a father." Ethan wanted to explain about the therapy, about the progress he'd made in understanding his own psychology, about the way working with terminally ill children had taught him about courage and resilience. But Olivia's anger was a wall he couldn't breach with explanations or justifications. "I'm trying," he said simply. The words inadequate but honest. "You're performing," Olivia corrected, her voice deadly quiet. "You're putting on a show for the court, for the social workers, for everyone except the people who actually matter. Those children trust you because they don't know what you really are. But I do. I know you run when things get real." She moved toward her car, fishing keys out of her purse with hands that trembled slightly, despite her controlled fury. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, some part of him still believing he could fix this with the right words. "Olivia, please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" She whirled to face him again, and Ethan saw tears gathering in her eyes despite her anger. "Explain how you couldn't commit to the woman you claim to love, but you can commit to reading stories to cancer patients? Explain how you can show up consistently for children who aren't yours, but you couldn't show up for your own?" The parking garage fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic from the street above. Olivia stood beside her car, keys clutched in her fist, looking every inch the warrior mother protecting her cubs from a threat they didn't understand. "I love you," Ethan said desperately, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I love you, and I love our children, and I know I've made terrible mistakes, but—" "Love," Olivia repeated, as if the word tasted bitter in her mouth. "You keep using that word, like it means something, like it excuses everything you've done." "It doesn't excuse anything," Ethan admitted. "But it's real, Olivia. Whatever else you think about me, what I feel for you is real." Olivia stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw something that might have been pain flicker across her features before the protective mask slipped back into place. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked quietly. "I see a man who's very good at wanting things he can't have, and very bad at fighting for things he can. You want to love me. You want to be a father to our children. Then stop performing for everyone else and start doing the work where it actually matters." She opened her car door, then paused to deliver one final devastating blow. "Those children in there," she gestured toward the hospital, "they trust you because they don't know you'll leave. But James and Ava will know because I'll make sure they understand that love isn't something you feel, it's something you do every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Olivia got into her car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage. Around him, the concrete walls seemed to close in, carrying the weight of everything he'd lost and might never regain. But even as he stood there, drowning in the wreckage of another failed attempt at connection, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from the volunteer coordinator. "Noah is asking if you're coming next week. The chemo isn't going well, and he could really use a friend." Ethan stared at the message, torn between Olivia's accusation that he was performing and the genuine need of a 10-year-old boy who was fighting for his life. Maybe Olivia was right. Maybe everything he did now was tainted by his past failures. Suspect because of his abandonment of her and their children, but Noah was expecting him. Liam had asked him to bring a new Batman comic. Chloe was working on a drawing that she wanted to show him. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan understood the difference between doing something because it would help him and doing something because it was right. Olivia might never forgive him for volunteering at her hospital. The court might never see it as genuine rather than strategic, but Noah needed him to show up next week. And for once in his life, Ethan Carter was going to be there for someone who needed him, regardless of whether it helped his own cause, even if it cost him everything else. Chapter 6. Fourth Rejection, the Custody Battle. The decision to file for joint custody came during a sleepless November night. 3 months after Olivia's parking garage confrontation, Ethan had honored his commitment to Noah, Liam, Chloe, and the other children, showing up every week regardless of Olivia's accusations. But his own children remained strangers. James and Ava were 8 months old now, developing personalities Ethan could only glimpse during brief Saturday visits. Ava was cautious and observant, studying his face before gracing him with rare smiles. James was outgoing, reaching for Ethan's watch and giggling, but even his openness felt conditional. The breaking point came when Ava took her first steps during a visit. She'd been cruising along furniture when she suddenly let go and took 3 unsteady steps toward Ethan before tumbling into his arms. The joy on her face, the pride in her achievement, it was everything Ethan had dreamed of as her father. But Olivia would hear about those first steps secondhand from Mrs. Clark's report. Ava would take first steps again at home, and Olivia would think she was witnessing a milestone when she was seeing a repeat performance. That night, Ethan called William Bradley. "I want to file for joint custody," Ethan said without preamble. "Ethan, we've discussed this. Building slowly might be. My daughter took her first steps today." Ethan interrupted. "And her mother wasn't there because we're trapped in this system where I'm treated like a criminal visiting my own children. Joint custody will be a battle. Miss Bennett will fight this with everything she has. Then we fight back," Ethan said, his voice harder than he'd ever heard it. "I've done everything the court asked. It's time for my children to know their father as more than a Saturday stranger." "Are you sure? Once we file, there's no going back. This will get ugly." Ethan thought about Ava's tentative steps, about James's delighted giggle, about all the moments he was missing. "File the papers," he said. Olivia stared at the legal documents scattered across her kitchen table, her hands shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. Petition for modification of custody arrangement, motion for joint physical custody, request for overnight visitation. Overnight visitation. The thought of sending James and Ava away for entire nights, of not being there if they cried or needed comfort, made Olivia's chest tight with panic. They were still babies, still nursing, still utterly dependent on the routines and security she'd worked so hard to establish. "He's actually doing this," Rachel said from across the table, her voice tight with disbelief. "After everything you said to him, he's actually trying to take them away from you." "Not take them," Olivia corrected automatically, though the distinction felt meaningless. Joint custody means they'd spend half their time with him, half their lives with a man they barely know. Susan Harper spread the legal documents with grim efficiency, her expression more serious than Olivia had seen during their previous court battle. "This is more aggressive than I expected," Susan admitted. "Bradley is requesting 5,050 custody, alternating weeks. They're arguing that Mr. Carter has demonstrated consistency and commitment through his supervised visits, and that the children would benefit from equal time with both parents." "They're babies," Olivia said desperately. "They're 8 months old. They need stability, routine, consistency." "How is bouncing between 2 houses consistent?" "The courts have been increasingly favorable to fathers' rights," Susan replied carefully. "And Mr. Carter has significant advantages: financial stability, a clean record. And he's been consistent with his visits. Plus, the children are responding well to him, according to the social workers' reports." Olivia felt the careful control she'd maintained for months beginning to crack. "So, what are my chances?" Susan hesitated, which was answer enough. "If this goes to trial, it's going to be difficult. Bradley will paint a picture of a father who's been systematically denied access to his children, despite demonstrating genuine commitment. They'll argue that you're being vindictive, preventing the children from having a relationship with their father." "I'm protecting them," Olivia said fiercely. "I'm protecting them from a man who abandoned us once and could do it again. I know that, but we need to prove it in court, and that means exposing Mr. Carter's pattern of abandonment in a way that will convince a judge that joint custody isn't in the children's best interests." Olivia felt trapped between impossible choices: fight and risk losing her children to a man who'd already proven his unreliability, or don't fight and hand them over voluntarily. Either way, James and Ava would pay the price for their parents' failures. "What do you need from me?" Olivia asked quietly. "Everything," Susan replied. Every detail about your relationship, every promise he broke, every time he chose something else over you and the children. We need to build a case that shows a pattern of abandonment and instability that would make joint custody harmful to the children. The courtroom was packed for the custody hearing. Olivia sat beside Susan, trying to project calm while her heart hammered. This time, the stakes felt impossibly higher, not just visitation, but who would raise James and Ava. Bradley rose with theatrical precision. Your Honor, over the past 8 months, Mr. Carter has demonstrated unwavering commitment to his children. He has attended every scheduled visit, maintained support payments, and taken significant steps to address the personal issues that led to his initial absence. Bradley outlined Ethan's therapy sessions, volunteer work, and complete compliance with court orders. Susan rose for the defense, the uphill battle written in her posture. Your Honor, Mr. Carter may have been consistent for 8 months, but consistency under court supervision is different from the daily reality of raising children. Miss Bennett has been the sole caregiver since birth, managing midnight feedings, illness, teething, every aspect of their care, while Mr. Carter enjoyed scheduled, supervised playtime. The character witnesses Bradley called were devastating. Mrs. Clark testified about Ethan's growth as a father. Dr. Foster spoke about his progress in therapy. Most damaging was Dr. Lauren Park, a child psychologist. Children benefit enormously from strong relationships with both parents. Dr. Park explained, research shows children with involved fathers demonstrate better emotional regulation, higher self-esteem, greater academic success. Denying these children equal time with their father could have lasting negative effects. When Olivia took the stand, she felt like walking to her execution. Miss Bennett, Susan began gently, can you describe the daily reality of caring for twin infants? Olivia took a breath, trying to find words that could convey the beautiful exhaustion of motherhood. They wake up every 3 hours, sometimes more often. They need to be fed, changed, comforted. When one sleeps, the other is often awake. I haven't had a full night's sleep in 8 months, but I wouldn't trade a moment of it. Has Mr. Carter ever cared for the children overnight? No, he's never had them for more than 2 hours at a time, and always with supervision. What concerns do you have about joint custody? Olivia looked across the courtroom at Ethan, who was watching her with an expression of such focused attention that it made her chest tight. James and Ava know me. They know my voice, my smell, my touch. I'm their security, their comfort when they're scared or hurt. They don't have that same bond with their father because he hasn't been there for the daily moments that build trust. Bradley's cross-examination was brutal but expected. He painted Olivia as overprotective, unwilling to allow the children to bond with their father, motivated by spite rather than their best interests. Miss Bennett, isn't it true that you've made no effort to facilitate a deeper relationship between Mr. Carter and his children? I followed every court order exactly as written, Olivia replied carefully. That's not what I asked. Have you made any effort to help your children bond with their father outside of the required visits? Olivia felt trapped. The honest answer was no. She'd done nothing to encourage a relationship between Ethan and their children beyond what the court mandated. But admitting that made her sound vindictive and uncooperative. I've protected my children from disappointment, she said finally. I won't let them get attached to someone who might leave again. But Mr. Carter hasn't left, has he? He's been consistent for 8 months. 8 months isn't a lifetime, Olivia shot back. 8 months isn't enough to prove that someone who abandoned me during pregnancy is ready to be a reliable father. When Ethan took the stand, Olivia braced herself for the same carefully crafted remorse he'd shown during the first hearing. Instead, she got something that surprised her. Raw honesty that cut straight to the heart of their situation. I made the worst mistake of my life when I walked away from Olivia, Ethan said in response to Bradley's opening question. Not just because I hurt her, but because I robbed myself of months with my children that I can never get back. Are you prepared to take on the full responsibilities of joint custody? I'm prepared to try, Ethan said, echoing his previous testimony. I've been learning everything I can about child development, about the specific needs of infants. I've baby-proofed my apartment, hired a nanny service for backup support, and rearranged my work schedule to accommodate their needs. Susan's cross-examination focused on the same themes as before. But this time Ethan's answers carried more weight because of his demonstrated consistency. Mr. Carter, you say you're prepared to take on full responsibility. What happens when one of the children gets sick at 3 o'clock in the morning, when they're teething and crying inconsolably, when you have a business crisis that demands your attention? The children come first, Ethan said without hesitation. I've learned that from watching Olivia these past months. Whatever else is happening in my life, James and Ava's needs come first. And if caring for them becomes overwhelming, if the reality doesn't match your expectations. Ethan looked directly at Olivia as he answered, his gray eyes holding hers with unmistakable sincerity. Then I figure it out. I get help. I learn. I adapt. But I don't run. I've learned the difference between being scared and being a coward, and I won't be a coward when it comes to my children. Judge Lynn called a recess, and Olivia followed Susan into the hallway, her legs unsteady with adrenaline and fear. How bad is it? Olivia asked. Though she already knew the answer from Susan's expression. Bad, Susan admitted. He's been consistent. He's prepared. And the children respond well to him. Unless we can prove actual unfitness or danger, the court is likely to grant some form of expanded custody. When court reconvened, Judge Lynn delivered her ruling with the clinical precision Olivia had come to dread. This court has considered all testimony and evidence presented. While Miss Bennett has been an exemplary primary caregiver, the evidence shows that Mr. Carter has demonstrated genuine commitment to his children and has taken significant steps to address the issues that led to his initial absence. Olivia felt the world tilting sideways as Judge Lynn continued. However, given the children's young age and their established routine with Miss Bennett, this court will implement a graduated custody schedule. Mr. Carter will have overnight visitation every other weekend, expanding to alternating weeks when the children turn 18 months old. Miss Bennett will retain primary physical custody, but both parents will share legal custody and decision-making responsibilities. Olivia barely heard the rest of the ruling through the roaring in her ears. Overnight visits, legal custody, decision-making responsibilities. She'd lost not completely, but catastrophically enough that her world would never be the same. Outside the courthouse, Olivia stood on the steps while Susan gathered her papers and prepared to leave. Ethan emerged from the building with his legal team, but when he saw Olivia, he dismissed them with a gesture and walked toward her. Olivia, he said quietly, and she could hear something that might have been regret in his voice. She turned to face him, surprised by the numbness that had replaced her earlier panic. Congratulations, you got what you wanted. This isn't what I wanted, Ethan replied, echoing his words from 8 months earlier. I wanted us to work together for the children's sake. I wanted to find a way to be a family, even if not the traditional kind. Olivia laughed, but it came out broken and sharp. You wanted a fight. You got one. And you lost. I still have primary custody, and the children will still call me when they're scared in the middle of the night. You get weekends and every other holiday. But you don't get to be their real parent. The words were cruel, and Olivia knew it. But she was drowning in the reality of what had just happened, and cruelty felt like the only life preserver available. They're my children too, Ethan said quietly. I know I haven't earned the right to be their father yet, but I'm going to keep trying until I do. Olivia stared at him, this man who'd destroyed her trust and was now systematically dismantling the life she'd built for their children. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she'd once loved, vulnerable, determined, carrying his own pain but refusing to let it defeat him. Then the moment passed, and all she could see was the enemy who'd just won a battle she couldn't afford to lose. You wanted to fight for our children, Olivia said, her voice cold with finality. Good, but understand this. Every day they spend with you, they'll know that you're the man who abandoned their mother when she needed you most. They'll know that you had to be forced by a court to be their father. And when they're old enough to choose, they'll choose the parent who was there from the beginning. She walked away without looking back, leaving Ethan standing alone on the courthouse steps. But even as she climbed into Rachel's car, even as she told herself she'd fight this new arrangement every step of the way, Olivia couldn't shake the memory of the pain in Ethan's eyes when she'd delivered her final blow. For the first time since this legal nightmare began, She wondered if maybe her need to protect her children was causing as much damage as the man she was trying to protect them from. Chapter 7. The Breaking Point. 8 months after the twins' birth, Ethan's life had settled into a rhythm that felt simultaneously routine and heartbreaking. Every other Friday, he transformed his sterile penthouse into something resembling a home for two 18-month-old children who remained beautiful, polite strangers. James and Ava had learned his patterns. They knew he would read them stories in silly voices, that he had specific toys just for them, that he was the weekend father who tried too hard and smiled too much. But they didn't run to him when they fell down. They didn't seek his comfort when they were scared. When they cried, they asked for Mama with the heartbreaking certainty of children who knew exactly who their safe person was. And it wasn't the man who bought them expensive toys and lived in an apartment that felt more like a museum than a home. The overnight visits were exercises in careful choreography. Ethan had hired Carla Morales, a nanny with 20 years of experience, to help during the children's stays, not because he couldn't handle 2 toddlers alone, but because James and Ava needed the security of someone who felt familiar when their world shifted every other weekend. "They're good children," Carla often told him, watching as Ethan tried to coax Ava to eat her dinner or convince James to play with something other than the cardboard box his expensive toys had come in. "But they don't know you yet. They're polite with you, like you're a nice stranger. It takes time to feel like family." Time. The one thing Ethan couldn't buy, couldn't negotiate, couldn't force. Every other weekend, he got 48 hours to prove himself worthy of children who'd already decided that love lived in a small apartment across town with a mother who sang off-key lullabies and knew exactly how to make their fears disappear. His therapy sessions with Dr. Foster had become exercises in brutal honesty about the impossible situation he'd created for himself. "Tell me about this weekend, Doctor," Foster said during their Tuesday session, her patient attention focused on the man who'd learned to dissect his own failures with clinical precision. "Ava had a nightmare," Ethan said, staring at his hands. "She woke up crying for Olivia, and nothing I did could comfort her. I tried reading to her, singing songs I'd heard Olivia sing, even calling Olivia to see if she could help over the phone. But Ava just kept crying for her mama, and I felt like an intruder in my own child's life. How did that make you feel?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that could capture the devastating loneliness of being needed by children who didn't actually want you. "Like I was being punished for the rest of my life for one terrible decision," he said finally. "Like no matter what I do, how consistent I am, how much I love them, I'll always be the substitute parent, the one they tolerate because they have to, not the one they choose because they want to. Do you think that's Olivia's fault?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan's first instinct was to say yes. Olivia could have made this easier, could have helped the children adjust, could have been less cold during their exchanges. But his months of therapy had taught him to look deeper than his initial reactions. "It's my fault," he admitted. "I created this situation when I walked away from Olivia during her pregnancy. Everything else, the legal battles, the children's confusion, their preference for their mother is just the consequence of that original choice." "What would it take to change the dynamic?" Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A time machine. The ability to go back and be the man Olivia needed me to be from the beginning. Since time travel isn't available, what's the alternative?" "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "I keep showing up, keep trying, keep hoping that eventually James and Ava will see me as more than the weekend obligation. But sometimes I think they'd be better off if I just disappeared again." "Doctor," Foster leaned forward slightly, her expression sharpening. "Do you really believe that?" "No," Ethan said immediately. "But I think about it. When Ava cries for her mama, and I can't comfort her. When James asks when he gets to go home during our Saturday at the park. When they both light up. When Olivia comes to pick them up in a way they never light up when they see me. I think about whether my presence in their lives is helping them or just making everyone miserable." It was this conversation that was replaying in Ethan's head when his assistant burst into his office on a Thursday afternoon in December, her usually composed demeanor shattered by whatever news she was carrying. "Mr. Carter," Lauren said breathlessly, "there's been a fire at Olivia's apartment building. The children—" Ethan was moving before she finished the sentence, grabbing his keys and jacket, while his heart hammered against his ribs. The drive to Olivia's neighborhood passed in a blur of traffic lights and worst-case scenarios. By the time he arrived at the scene, the fire department had the blaze under control, but the building's facade was blackened with smoke damage, and the parking lot was full of displaced residents, clutching whatever belongings they'd managed to save. Ethan found Olivia sitting on the curb across the street, still in her hospital scrubs, holding James and Ava, while she stared at the building that had been their home. Red Cross volunteers distributed blankets and water, but Olivia seemed oblivious to everything except the two children in her arms. Ethan approached slowly, afraid that his presence would somehow make this tragedy worse. When Olivia looked up and saw him, her face went through a rapid progression of emotions: surprise, weariness, and then something that looked dangerously close to relief. "How did you?" she started to ask. "Lauren saw it on the news," Ethan explained quietly, kneeling on the pavement beside them. "Are you hurt? Are the children okay?" "We're fine," Olivia said automatically, but her voice shook as she said it. "We got out in time." Everyone got out, but everything else. She gestured helplessly toward the building, and Ethan could see smoke-damaged windows on what he knew was the third floor, where Olivia's small apartment had been their sanctuary. James looked up at Ethan with curious eyes, apparently unfazed by the chaos around them. "Da," he said clearly, using the word Olivia had taught both children, despite everything between them. "Fire truck. I see it, buddy," Ethan said softly, his heart breaking at the casual way his son included him in this moment of crisis. "Big red truck, right?" Ava was less interested in conversation, her face pressed against Olivia's shoulder, with the exhausted surrender of a child who'd been through too much excitement for one day. But when she caught sight of Ethan, she reached out one small hand toward him, a gesture of trust that felt like an unexpected gift. "Olivia," Ethan said carefully, "I know you don't want my help, but don't," Olivia interrupted. But her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. "Just don't. I can't handle your pity on top of everything else." Ethan settled more comfortably on the curb, ignoring the December cold seeping through his expensive suit. "It's not pity, then. What is it?" The question hung between them, and Ethan realized this was the first real conversation they'd had in months that wasn't filtered through lawyers or social workers or the careful choreography of custody exchanges. "It's love," he said simply. "I love you. I've loved you this whole time, and I was too broken to admit it." Olivia's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Love? You think this is love, showing up at my worst moment with your declarations?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "Love would have been staying when things got hard the first time. Love would have been answering your calls when you were pregnant and scared. Love would have been fighting for us instead of running away." Olivia stared at him, clearly not expecting such unvarnished honesty. Around them, the controlled chaos of the fire scene continued. Firefighters checking for hotspots, Red Cross volunteers coordinating temporary housing, neighbors comforting each other over the shock of sudden displacement. "So what is this then?" Olivia asked, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "This is me understanding too late what I threw away," Ethan replied. "This is me knowing that I can't fix what I broke, but refusing to compound the damage by disappearing again." Ava had fallen asleep against Olivia's shoulder, her small face peaceful despite the chaos around them. James was fighting sleep with the determination of a toddler who didn't want to miss anything interesting, his eyes heavy but fixed on the fire trucks with fascination. "My sister is coming to get us," Olivia said eventually. "We'll stay with her until we can find another place." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The urge to offer his penthouse, his resources, his help was overwhelming. But he'd learned that Olivia's independence was both her strength and her armor. She wouldn't accept his help, because accepting it would mean acknowledging that she needed him, and she'd worked too hard to build a life that didn't depend on unreliable men. "The children's things," Ethan said instead. "Their clothes, their toys." "Gone," Olivia said flatly. "Everything's gone. Their baby books, their first outfits, the blankets they've slept with since birth. All of it." The devastation in her voice broke something in Ethan's chest. Those weren't just possessions. They were the tangible proof of James and Ava's brief history, the artifacts of their mother's love that couldn't be replaced with money or good intentions. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in months. "Are you?" Olivia turned to look at him directly, her brown eyes holding more pain than anger for the first time since the hospital. "Are you sorry this happened, or are you sorry you can't fix it?" The question was fair and devastating. Ethan had spent so many months trying to fix what he'd broken through, legal action and grand gestures, that he'd forgotten how to simply sit with someone else's pain without trying to solve it. "I'm sorry you and the children are going through this," he said carefully. "I'm sorry that life keeps throwing obstacles at you when you're already carrying so much. And I'm sorry that my presence here probably makes it harder instead of easier." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decide whether his words were genuine or another performance. "You want to know the worst part?" she said finally. "The worst part is that when I saw you walking toward us, for just a second, I was relieved. For one stupid moment I thought, thank God, someone's here who can help. And then I remembered that you're not someone I can count on." The words hit him like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the heart of his failures. But underneath the pain, Ethan heard something that gave him the tiniest spark of hope. Olivia had been relieved to see him, even if only for a moment. "You can count on me," he said quietly. "I know my track record doesn't support that, but Olivia, you can count on me for the children. For whatever you need. For as long as you need it. Can I?" Olivia's voice was raw with exhaustion and unshed tears. "Can I count on you when the legal bills pile up? When the insurance company tries to deny our claim? When the children ask why we can't go home? Will you still be here when helping us stops feeling noble and starts feeling like work?" Ethan looked at his children, James, finally succumbing to sleep in Olivia's arms. Ava drooling slightly on her mother's shoulder and felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. Not the desperate love that demanded reciprocation, not the guilty need to fix what he'd broken, but a simple, unwavering commitment. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "I'll be here for whatever comes next, whether you want me here or not. Not because I expect anything from you, not because I think it will earn me forgiveness, but because you're the mother of my children, and you shouldn't have to face this alone." Olivia stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw her carefully constructed walls wavering slightly. "My sister is coming," she repeated, but with less conviction than before. "Okay," Ethan said simply. "I'll wait with you until she gets here." And so they sat together on the curb as the December darkness fell around them, two people who'd loved each other and lost each other, holding the children who connected them permanently despite all the damage between them. For the first time in over a year, they weren't adversaries or co-parents managing a difficult arrangement. They were just two people who'd been through something terrible and were trying to figure out what came next. When Rachel arrived an hour later, she found them still sitting together, James and Ava sleeping peacefully despite the chaos, their parents watching over them with the vigilant attention of people who understood that everything could change in an instant. "Olivia," Rachel called softly, and Olivia looked up with the dazed expression of someone emerging from shock. "Rachel," Olivia said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you for coming." Ethan stood as Rachel approached, prepared for the hostility that usually accompanied any interaction with Olivia's family. Instead, Rachel looked at him with something that might have been grudging respect. "You came?" Rachel said simply. "Of course I came," Ethan replied carefully, transferring a sleeping James to Rachel's arms. "They're my children, too." As Olivia gathered Ava and their few salvaged belongings, Ethan hung back, uncertain whether his continued presence would be welcome or invasive. Olivia paused beside him as Rachel headed toward her car. "Thank you," Olivia said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes, "for staying, for not trying to fix everything, for just being here." "Always," Ethan said, the word carrying the weight of a promise he finally understood how to keep. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'll be here." Olivia nodded once, then walked away toward her sister's car and whatever temporary refuge they could provide. But for the first time since that awful night when he destroyed their relationship, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd taken a step toward becoming the man Olivia had needed him to be all along. Even if it was too late to save what they'd lost, maybe it wasn't too late to build something new from the ashes. Chapter 8. The Long Road Back. Ethan didn't contact Olivia for 2 months after the fire knot because he didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at him to check on them, to offer help, to insert himself into their crisis. But Dr. Foster had taught him the difference between supporting someone and overwhelming them, and Olivia had spent over a year building walls his good intentions had only reinforced. Instead, Ethan channeled his energy into becoming the man he should have been from the beginning. Therapy sessions increased to 3 times a week, diving deeper into the abandonment patterns that had shaped 32 years of emotional avoidance. Dr. Foster pushed him past comfortable insights into the messy work of actually changing behavioral patterns that had been decades in the making. "Tell me about the Al-Anon meeting, Doctor," Foster said during a particularly difficult session in January. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It felt strange at first. "I'm not an addict, and neither are my parents. But the abandonment patterns, they're similar. The way people leave when things get difficult. The way families break apart under pressure. Listening to people talk about making amends, about the difference between saying sorry and actually changing it, felt relevant. The Al-Anon meetings had become Ethan's most honest hour each week. Sitting in a circle of people who understood loving someone unreliable, he learned about the damage inconsistency caused and the long road back to trustworthiness. Step 9 is about making amends, shared Deborah, a woman whose husband had been sober for 5 years. But real amends aren't about what we say. They're about how we live differently going forward. Ethan had started making anonymous amends before he understood what he was doing. The Displaced Families Fund had grown quietly, helping not just Olivia's neighbors, but families across Seattle who'd lost homes to fires, floods, and economic disasters. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. He was learning what it meant to be useful to people who needed help without expecting anything in return. The volunteer work at the hospital continued, despite Olivia's accusations about his motives. Noah was in full remission now, a 13-year-old cancer survivor who still wanted to debate superhero movies. Liam had started high school, his childhood battle with leukemia just a memory that made him more compassionate than most teenagers. Chloe was 8 now, and her artwork had evolved from stick figures to detailed portraits of the nurses who'd saved her life. "You keep coming back," Chloe observed during one of their art sessions. "Even when people are mean to you." Ethan paused in his coloring. Chloe had insisted he help with a particularly complex rainbow. "What do you mean?" "Some of the grown-ups think you're only here to make yourself feel better. But you keep reading to us even when they whisper about you." The observation hit harder than any of Olivia's accusations. These children, fighting battles that would destroy most adults, had noticed his consistency when the people who mattered most to him saw only manipulation. "I keep coming back because you guys are worth it," Ethan said simply. "Whatever anyone else thinks doesn't change that." When he finally contacted Olivia, it was through a letter delivered by Rachel, not because he was avoiding Olivia, but because he wanted his words to reach her without the pressure of immediate response. "Olivia, I'm not writing this to ask for anything or to try to convince you of anything. I'm writing because I need you to know that I understand now why you couldn't trust me to be a father to James and Ava. I spent our entire relationship terrified that you would leave me, so I left first. I told myself I was protecting both of us from inevitable pain, but I was really just protecting myself from the vulnerability that comes with loving someone completely. When you told me about the pregnancy, my first thought wasn't about the children we'd created. It was about how much it would hurt when you realized I wasn't worth staying for. I was wrong about everything. You weren't going to leave me. You were trying to build a life with me. And our children, they weren't a trap or a burden. They were a gift I was too broken to receive. I've been attending Al-Anon meetings, learning about the damage that emotional abandonment causes and the work it takes to become reliable. I understand now that change isn't about grand gestures or perfect words. It's about showing up consistently, especially when it's difficult. I can't promise I'll never be scared again, but I can promise I'll never run again, not from you, not from our children, not from the work it takes to be worthy of the love you offered me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm simply telling you that I'm doing the work to become a better man, not because I expect it to change anything between us, but because James and Ava deserve a father who has learned the difference between loving someone and being afraid of losing them. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did, even though I was too much of a coward to do it right the first time. Ethan. Rachel had called him 3 days later. She read it, was all she said. But Ethan heard something in her voice that might have been approval. "How is she? How are the children tired?" "They're staying with me, which is crowded but manageable. Olivia's looking for a new apartment, but everything in her price range is either too small or too far from the hospital. Ethan had bitten back the offer to help with housing costs. Olivia's independence wasn't just pride, it was survival. She'd learned not to depend on unreliable people, and his money couldn't buy his way back into the category of people she could count on. "Tell her," Ethan started, then stopped. "Tell her I hope they find something good, and that if she ever needs anything, not money, just anything, she can call." "I'll tell her," Rachel said and hung up. The business crisis hit in February, threatening to destroy everything Ethan had built over the past decade. A key investor was pulling out, taking half their funding and leaving the company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. The old Ethan would have thrown himself into 18-hour days, would have used the crisis as an excuse to avoid everything else in his life. Instead, Ethan maintained his schedule: therapy sessions, hospital visits, Al-Anon, meetings. None of it changed, despite the professional emergency. When his board demanded he cancel everything else to focus on saving the company, Ethan had surprised himself with his response. "The company matters," he told them during an emergency meeting, "but it's not the only thing that matters. I have commitments to people who are depending on me, and I won't break those commitments, even if it costs us everything." Somehow, that clarity of priority had made him a better businessman rather than a worse one. Knowing that some things were more important than profit helped him negotiate from a position of genuine strength rather than desperate fear. The company survived. More importantly, Ethan had proven to himself that he could face a crisis without abandoning the people who mattered most to him. Chapter 9. Earning Trust. Olivia's call came on a rainy Thursday, in the 10th of March, months after the twins' birth. Ethan was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang with a number he'd memorized but hadn't seen in months. "It's Olivia," she said without preamble. "Can we talk?" Ethan's heart rate spiked, but his voice remained steady. "Of course. What do you need? I got your letter. I've been thinking about what you said about showing up consistently. I want to try something different with the visits." They met at the hospital's family room, neutral territory where Olivia felt comfortable and Ethan felt appropriately humbled. Olivia looked tired but determined, her dark hair pulled back in the practical style he remembered from their early days together. "The supervised visits aren't working," Olivia said without preamble. "Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the children can't really get to know you in 2-hour blocks with a stranger watching." Ethan nodded, afraid to hope but unable to suppress it completely. "What are you proposing?" "Unsupervised visits at the hospital, in the playroom, 2 hours, twice a week, to start. If it goes well," Olivia paused, clearly struggling with the words, "if it goes well, we can talk about expanding it." "What changed your mind?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. "Your letter, the way you handled your business crisis without disappearing. Rachel told me you could have lost everything, but you didn't change your schedule, didn't cancel your commitments to anyone else." "Those commitments matter to me," Ethan said quietly. "I know. That's what changed my mind." The new visits were a revelation, without Mrs. Clark taking notes in the corner, without the artificial constraints of supervised visits. Ethan finally got to see his children as they really were, rather than as they performed for strangers. Ava was cautious but curious, studying Ethan's face with serious brown eyes before accepting his offerings of books or toys. When she finally smiled at him, genuinely smiled, not the polite response of supervised visits, Ethan felt something crack open in his chest that had been locked away for months. James was pure energy, climbing on everything, chattering in his developing vocabulary, treating Ethan's watch like the world's most fascinating object. When he fell, and immediately looked to Ethan for comfort rather than crying for mama, Ethan understood what it meant to be needed by his children. "Duh," James said one afternoon, handing Ethan a toy car with the casual confidence of a child who'd finally decided this particular adult was trustworthy. "Drive car." "We can drive the car," Ethan agreed, settling onto the floor beside his son. "Where should we go?" "Hospital," James declared with toddler logic. "See, Mama." The casual way James included Ethan in his world, the assumption that they would do things together, made Ethan's throat tight with emotion. This was what he'd been fighting for, not legal rights or custody schedules, but the simple trust of children who were learning to love him. Olivia watched these interactions from across the playroom, and Ethan could see something shifting in her expression. She was seeing him not as the man who'd abandoned her, but as the father he was becoming. The business crisis that hit in February was nothing compared to the personal crisis that hit in late April. A competitor launched a hostile takeover attempt backed by investors who saw Ethan's company as undervalued and vulnerable. The financial press was calling it the business story of the year, and Ethan's lawyers were demanding, "This is about survival. You need to cancel everything else," his lead attorney insisted during an emergency meeting. Ethan looked around the conference table at men in expensive suits who'd never had to choose between professional success and personal integrity. "No," he said quietly. "I have commitments that matter more than this company, more than losing everything you've built." "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. He kept his schedule with James and Ava, showing up tired but present, proving to himself and to Olivia that his priorities had fundamentally changed. When Ava was sick with a stomach bug and couldn't keep anything down, Ethan spent their entire visit holding her while she dozed fitfully against his chest, grateful to be useful in such a simple, fundamental way. "You didn't have to come today," Olivia observed, sitting beside him as Ava slept. "She's just going to sleep the whole time." "She needs to know I'll be here even when she's not at her best," Ethan replied, adjusting Ava's position so she could sleep more comfortably, "especially when she's not at her best." Olivia stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw something that looked dangerously like the beginning of forgiveness flicker across her features. The takeover attempt failed, largely because Ethan's focused leadership during the crisis had impressed investors and employees alike, but Ethan barely noticed the professional victory because something much more important was happening in his personal life. James and Ava were beginning to trust him, not just tolerate his presence or enjoy his visits, but actually trust him with the uncomplicated affection of children who decided he was safe and reliable and worth their trust. It was during one particularly good visit in May, James building block towers for Ethan to knock down, while Ava crawled determinedly toward a toy just out of reach, that Olivia delivered the news that threatened to destroy everything Ethan had worked to build. "I need to tell you something," Olivia said quietly, her voice carefully neutral in the way that preceded devastating news. Ethan looked up at her from the block tower James was demolishing with delighted giggles, his heart pounding with familiar panic. "I've been offered a job," Olivia continued, "head pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital." "It's a full relocation," Olivia said quietly, watching his face carefully. "That's everything I've wanted professionally." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's incredible, Olivia. You deserve that." "It's in Boston," she said quietly. The words hit him like a physical blow. Boston, 3,000 miles away. James and Ava would become holiday visitors, if he was lucky. "It's a full relocation package," Olivia continued quietly. "Amazing benefits, with a chance for the twins to grow up somewhere new near the beautiful ocean. With good schools, a fresh start for everyone." "When do you need to decide?" he asked quietly. 2 weeks, Olivia replied. "I wanted to tell you first before we made any decisions about moving." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Thank you for telling me." They finished the visit in a subdued quiet, James and Ava oblivious to the adult crisis unfolding around them. As Ethan gathered their things to leave, he made a final decision that changed everything forever. "Olivia," he said softly, "whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'll support it. If you move to Boston because you believe it's best for you and the children, then that's what matters." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "You're not going to try to stop me?" "No," Ethan said, meaning it completely. "I love you, and I love them enough to want what's best for you, even if it costs me everything." For the first time in over a year, Olivia looked at a version of Ethan Carter that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with, someone who was willing to put her needs above his own fears, even though it cost him everything he'd fought for. Chapter 10. Fighting for Forever. Olivia made her decision during what might have been their last visit together. They sat in the hospital playroom, silent, while James and Ava slept peacefully, exhausted from an afternoon of energetic play. The silence was heavy, carrying the weight of choices that would determine their future forever. "I've been thinking about Boston," Olivia said quietly, watching their sleeping twins instead of Ethan's face. "It really is everything I've always wanted. Head pediatric nurse at one of the country's top children's hospitals. The salary alone would mean never worrying about money again." Ethan felt his heart breaking with each word, but he kept his face calm and neutral. It sounds like an incredible opportunity. It is, Olivia agreed. The twins would grow up near the ocean-beautiful schools, cultural opportunities, a fresh start for everything. Have you decided? He asked quietly. Olivia looked at him finally, and for a moment Ethan saw something vulnerable in her eyes that he hadn't seen since the night he'd broken their relationship. I keep asking myself what's best for James and Ava, she said slowly, and I keep coming back to the same question, what kind of life do I want to show them? Ethan waited silently, afraid that speaking would influence a decision that was entirely Olivia's. Do I want to teach them that when life gets difficult, you just run away to somewhere easier, that when someone hurts you, you put 3,000 miles between yourself and the possibility of being hurt again? Sometimes running away is self-preservation, Ethan said gently. Sometimes it's the healthy choice. And sometimes it's just fear dressed up as wisdom, Olivia replied. I've been afraid for so long. Ethan, afraid to trust you, afraid to believe you've really changed, afraid to let the children get attached to someone who might leave again. But watching you these past few months. She trailed off, and Ethan felt a mix of hope and terror warring in his chest. What have you decided? He asked quietly. Olivia took a deep breath, the kind that came before life-changing announcements. I'm turning down the Boston offer. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. Olivia, you don't have to. I'm not doing it for you, she interrupted firmly. I'm doing it because running away, even to something good, would mean I'm making the same mistake you did. I'm choosing to stay because this is where we're building our life, and I won't let fear make my decisions anymore. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Ethan looked at Olivia, this incredible woman who'd raised their children alone and somehow found the courage to face him despite everything, and saw the strength he'd always loved. What does that mean for us? Ethan asked cautiously. I don't know yet, Olivia admitted. But I think I'd like to find out if you're willing to try again, slowly, with rules and boundaries, and the understanding that trust has to be rebuilt one day at a time. Ethan felt tears gathering in his eyes, emotions too big for the careful control he'd maintained for months. Olivia, I would do anything for the chance to try again. Not anything, Olivia corrected with a small smile. Just the right things. Every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Their first real date happened 3 weeks later, dinner at the same diner where they'd shared pie during their first relationship. Olivia looked beautiful in a simple blue dress that made her skin glow, but Ethan could see the nervousness in her posture, the careful way she sat across from him, like someone prepared to flee at the first sign of disappointment. This is strange, Olivia admitted, poking at her salad with uncertain focus. Dating the father of my children, trying to fall in love with someone I already know can break my heart. We don't have to do this, Ethan said immediately. If it's too strange, if it brings up too much, no. Olivia interrupted. I want to try. I just need you to understand that this isn't about getting back what we had. That relationship ended when you walked away. This is about building something new. Ethan nodded, understanding the distinction. What do you need from me? Time, Olivia said simply. Patience. And the understanding that some days I'll look at you and see the man I'm falling in love with, and other days I'll see the man who abandoned me when I was pregnant and scared. I need you to be okay with both. I can do that, Ethan promised. The relationship that emerged was different from their first attempt, more careful, more intentional, built on a foundation of earned trust rather than passionate impulse. Ethan courted Olivia with the patience of someone who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. Small gestures rather than grand ones. Consistency over intensity. They attended family therapy together, learning how to communicate without the defensive patterns they'd developed during their legal battles. James and Ava adjusted to seeing their parents together with the adaptability of children who'd never known their family to be conventional. Mama, da, together. James observed one afternoon when they'd all gone to the park, his toddler vocabulary capturing something profound in its simplicity. Yes, baby, Olivia replied, watching Ethan push Ava on the swing with gentle patience. Together. The proposal came 6 months later, not with fireworks or photographers, but during a quiet moment after they'd put the twins to bed in Olivia's new apartment. Ethan had been staying over more frequently, helping with bedtime routines and morning chaos, learning the rhythm of family life he'd missed. Olivia was grading paperwork from a difficult day when Ethan knelt beside her chair, a simple ring box in his hands. "Olivia," he said quietly, waiting until she looked up. "I can't promise I'll never be scared again. I can't promise perfection or that I won't make mistakes. But I can promise I'll never run again. Will you marry a man who's finally learned the difference between being afraid and being a coward?" Olivia stared at the ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious display the old Ethan might have chosen, then at the man offering it. This wasn't the charming businessman who'd swept her off her feet 2 years ago. This was someone harder won, more genuine, proven by time and tested by difficulty. "Yes," she said simply, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They got married 6 months later in the hospital chapel where they'd first met, surrounded by colleagues who'd witnessed their journey and children from the pediatric ward who'd taught them both about courage. James and Ava were ring bearers, toddling down the aisle with the serious concentration of children given important jobs. Noah, now 15 and cancer-free, read a passage about second chances. Chloe, 10 and thriving, presented Olivia with a drawing of their family stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, captioned, "People who choose each other." As Ethan and Olivia exchanged vows, promising to choose each other daily, especially when it was difficult, neither pretended their love story had been easy or conventional, but looking at their children, their friends, and the community they'd built from the ashes of their first attempt, they knew they'd found something more valuable than easy. They'd found a love worth fighting for, worth earning, worth keeping.